Hello everyone, I'm John from Fast Films and today we are going to take a look at a 2013 crime drama film called Filth. The movie flips off with the premiering scene showing some bullies trailing their next victim. They beat him up for a little while and a dressed-up person interrupts them. After seeing her face, they ran for dear life. The lady checks out the guy and walks away. On a fresh morning, Bruce walks around the streets of Scotland as he narrates how things are with him and his wife, Carol. He makes his way to a building and sits down with a bunch of other detectives. The boss, Toll, enters the room, sits down, and explains their new case to the entire group. The group comes up with nothing helpful to the case. Bruce meets all his other detective colleagues and his boss, Toll. Bruce explains the filthy and unfilthy things they've done. Toll calls Bruce and explains a few things to him if he wants to get that promotion he's been talking about. The next scene shows Bruce and some friends in a car doing a stakeout. As they talk about their stuff, their person of interest walks along the street with a lady. They get alerted as Bruce and Ray, one of his colleagues, get out of the car and make their way into an apartment building. They stop at room 410 and knock on the door. Their person of interest opens his door and the cops bust in. They find out the guy had been sleeping with a 16-year-old girl whose father was a lawyer. The girl begs Bruce to keep her situation a secret from her father and Bruce joins his colleague with their person of interest. They mess with him a little before leaving him. Shortly afterward, Bruce is seen doing the bed thingy with Chrissy who chokes his neck with some strings. They finish things up and Bruce dresses himself up. He complains to Chrissy for not having him in his heart and walks to a bar. There, he meets up with Blatesy, one of his friends, and talks about some of his cases with him. As they discuss their business further, Gus, one of Bruce's colleagues, pays them a visit. He sits down and discusses Valentine's Day with the guys. Bruce jokes around Gus and explains the situation on the ground with him. He makes Gus an offer so they both get their promotion at the same time. Gus agrees to the offer and they shake hands. Later on, Bruce leaves the bar and walks to the streets. There, he stops in front of a shop and sits down to have a chat with a homeless guy on the street. As he finishes his discussion, he hears a woman shouting someone's name on the street. Apparently, her man collapsed earlier. Bruce rushes in to help the man and gives him CPR. Thankfully, the ambulance arrives just in time, and the man gets saved. Later on, Bruce meets up with Dr. Rossi for a session with him. After confirming his patient was okay, Dr. Rossi gives Bruce a note and greets him Merry Christmas. Bruce returns the greetings as he walks out of Dr. Rossi's office. Later that night, Bruce plays with himself as he watches dirty movies. Later on, Bruce receives a call from one of his lady friends named Bunty. After a fruitless discussion, Bruce cuts the call and makes his way to a church-like event. They finish up their proceedings and continue with their party. Bruce talks with a man at the party, telling him about lady friends and work. As Bruce finishes his business with the man he was talking to earlier, he meets up with Hector. He and Hector exchange something before they part ways. On his way downstairs and out of the building, Bruce discusses with Gus yet again their work before he finally makes his way out of the building. Bruce pays a visit to a client's house. There, he meets with his client, Clifford Blatesy, and his wife, Bunty, whom he recognizes instantly. Bruce acts like he doesn't know Bunty and starts his interview sarcastically. He has a brief discussion with Bunty and leaves the residence for Toll's office. There, they talk about the case at hand. Bruce tells Toll about his time out from his job and Toll tells him to take care of all his jobs before leaving. Later on, Bruce and Gus are on a stakeout. They stand in front of a flower shop as they wait for their suspect to arrive. Shortly afterward, Bruce decides to interrogate the shop owner. Things get a bit violent as Bruce warns the shop owner to tell him the whereabouts of her man. The lady denies the person of interest being her man and Bruce walks away. On the way, he walks towards a lady he knows. Apparently, the lady named Mary was burying someone close to her that day. He sympathizes with her and walks hurriedly to his stakeout car. Now in his home, Bruce is about to take some medicine when he hallucinates and sees a late boy in the mirror. He looks back to check for the boy but doesn't find him. After a few more hallucinations, Bruce inhales some medicine and finds himself in a white room. In the room, he meets an old man dressed in white. Bruce is on the bed as the white man gives him some medicine to use. Later on, Bruce realizes something and waltzes into his colleague's room to explain his findings to his team. Bruce talks about the disturbing graffiti he saw on the streets. He tells his boss, Toll, about the event and freaks out a little bit. Toll calms him down and they discuss more the offender. Bruce then goes to a club and meets with Madame Maisie. She gives him something to help him out in his case. Bruce checks it out and gets joyous over being given the real thing. He thanks Maisie and settles into the club. Shortly after, Bruce catches a man chatting with Madame Maisie. He gets a bit jealous and sounds the horn to call the others together. Everybody gathers together and Bruce makes a very weird announcement. He tells the guys at the party to print out photos of their inappropriate photos, and they do. Every man prints out their inappropriate photos and presents them on a table. Madame Maisie checks out the pictures and sees Bruce's own biggest one. She picks him to make her smile that night, and he doesn't disappoint. The scene after that makes sure of it. After finishing their business, Bruce and his boys get to another bar. While at the bar, Bruce pays someone some money to disturb them later on. A little while passes. Bruce and his other colleagues are in a private section of the bar. The guy Bruce paid earlier comes in and talks with Peter Inglis, yet another colleague of Bruce. Peter says he doesn't know the guy and Gus cuts in. He knocks Peter out as the others throw up. The next morning, Bruce answers his boss as he explains his dealings with his boys the night before. The two of them get into an argument and quarrel over gays. After their argument, Bruce boards a plane with Blatty. After a long flight, Bruce and Blatty check into a hotel for the night. The next day, the duo enjoy themselves. They end their day in a bar. There, they see some gays in the corner, and Bruce spikes Blatty's drink with a medicine. Blatty takes the drink unknowingly and gets to the dance floor. Shortly afterward, the medicine kicks in and Blatty freaks out. Bruce locks him in their hotel room and runs to the bathroom. There, he also hallucinates. Eventually, Bruce gets to the streets and starts acting like a madman as he receives free slaps from women on the street. Shortly after, Bruce and Blatty fly back to Scotland. Bruce lay with nothing on in his room when his boss called him to work. Bruce runs as quickly as he can to his work. Upon getting to his workplace, Toll informs him, much to his displeasure, that Amanda Drummond is in charge of Bruce's case. This annoys Bruce as he storms out of his boss's office. Amanda follows him to have a word with him and they both get into an argument. Their argument ends abruptly when Bruce gets a visit from Mary. She comes with her son, Ewan, to thank Bruce for almost saving his father. She introduces her son to Bruce and gives Bruce a muffler she made for him during Christmas. Bruce accepts it, surprised at the kind gesture. Later on, Bruce is with Ray Lennox. Both of them discuss the recent development with the case. After their discussion, the next scene shows Carol talking to the camera on a show, saying she's for Bruce and Bruce only. That night, Bruce watches a former recording showing his wife, Stacy, having a cook-off with her daughter. He cries silently and picks up the phone and calls Bunty. She picks up the call and they discuss like crackheads over the phone. Bunty and Bruce have some phone romance as the two of them please themselves. Bruce cuts the call and gets into the white room again. This time, the old man in white teases him again about his wife Stacy. Bruce sees this and goes to a brothel to please himself. After finishing their business, Carol is seen standing and waiting for a ride. Her ride arrives and she enters it. They sing on the way as they drive away from the town. The next scene shows Bruce taking an excessive amount of substance. He gets to work looking very pale as the others walk in to begin their day at work. Gus enters and chants his bestie, Bruce, a Merry Christmas. Bruce checks out Gus and sees something else on Gus's head. Bruce freaks out and runs outside to his boss, Toll. There, he receives a reprimand from Toll, who tells him his chances of getting promoted are slim. This upsets Bruce as he gets into more drinking habits. While at home drinking, as usual, he sees the apparition of that deceased boy again. He tries to talk to his apparition when Gus pays him a visit. Gus gives him a Christmas present and Bruce offers him whiskey to thank him. While in the kitchen, Bruce takes a weird electronic machine and puts it in his pocket. Gus and Bruce drink till night. Gus gets distracted over the TV and Bruce zaps his head with that electric thing he put in his pocket earlier. The next day, Bruce drives Gus and drops him off, nauseated. Then, he goes to visit Bunty, who serves him a drink. A little while later, Bunty cajoles Bruce into having a romance session with her despite the fact that she was Cliff's wife. While they're at it, Bruce hallucinates again. This time, he tries his best to escape the old man he keeps meeting in his trances. As he tries to fight back at the old man, he gets reminded of how weak he was when his younger brother got taken out when they were younger. Bruce is brought back to reality by Amanda, who found him at the ladies' toilet. She asks him what was wrong with him and Bruce just runs away. After several shouts and fighting, Bruce finally opens up to Amanda. He tells her everything he's been going through and closes back up again when he sees another figure on Amanda's head. This surprises Amanda as she tells him he's not fit for work. Bruce storms down the stairs and walks to Blatty's cell. He punches Blatty in the face and leaves his cell after seeing another figure on his head. As he hits the road on foot, he sees Chrissy, who follows him home. Bruce chases Chrissy out of his house. However, Chrissy stays behind and forces herself on Bruce. After finishing her business with him, she leaves him crawling on the ground and asks him what the matter was. Bruce tells her he's not well. In the next scene, Bruce is seen dressing up as a lady. After dressing up, He walks down the street to stop by the street. A group of people picks him up as there's a flashback showing Bruce being the one acting like his wife, Stacy, all along. The group stops in front of an abandoned building and they get Bruce out of the car. They tie him up shortly afterward and beat him up. One of the assailants tries to romance Bruce and Bruce backfires by taking him out. After realizing he's finished off his assailant, Bruce sits down in the building as Amanda and Peter Inglis walk in to tell him how bad he's made things for them. The next day, Bruce meets with Toll, who tells him the application for his promotion has already been denied. Bruce nods in agreement to the fact that he's not fit for any jobs at the time. Toll takes his leave and Ray Lennox walks in, rubbing his promotion in on Bruce, who just sits quietly on his chair. Later on, Bruce is at the supermarket when he catches Stacy with her new husband. He tries to call her but it doesn't work. As he looks in despair, the lady whose husband was died, Mary, comes by and greets him. After exchanging pleasantries, she leaves with her son, Ewan. Later on, Bruce bathes and suits up when he receives a call from Mary telling him to visit them in the park later on. Bruce gets rid of his alcohol and walks out of his house. Meanwhile, Blatty sits down to watch a video recording of Bruce telling him what he should do to take better care of himself. This brings Blatty to tears as Bruce has never been this good to him ever before. The movie ends as Clifford Blatty reunites with his wife Bunty and Bruce ends his life. Thanks for watching, guys.